Hello, everyone. Thanks for checking out this special episode of Really Dicey. This is Manny, and I am here with.
Siegfried Trent. Hi, everybody. I'm a lead game designer for Everyday Heroes, and very happy to be, sharing a little bit about the game with everybody today.
Excellent. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. Everyday Heroes, the core rule book. Before we talk about this really amazing book, let's talk about yourself a little bit. I know you've been involved in writing role playing games for a long time, at least over, I want to say 15, maybe close to 20 years. Am I correct?
Yeah, well, I mean, since I was a kid, if we're going to count just sort of working on my own games and making things professionally, really the last 3 years have been sort of I've been full-time professional game designer and writer. Prior to that, I did some work with various companies, just doing little freelance gigs for my friends. I used to be a software engineer, and then I kind of took up world traveling, not really world traveling, but I traveled around the United States for a few years, and I went to Japan for a couple of years. So, uh, I didn't have time to be like a full time guy, but I used to do the Advanced Feats series, and then before that, that was with Kobold Press, and before that, I did something called the Netbook of Feats, which was really a fan community project, and the whole idea. This was when the Open Gaming license first came out, and I was very excited because I could sort of unofficially, officially write some things for D&D. You know, I'd done homebrew all my days, and so I did feats, and I love feats, and I found this group, the Netbook Community Council, and they were doing open gaming publishing in a community way, right? So everybody would submit things, and then they would turn it into a finished product. And so I joined that, and eventually became kind of the head of the feats book. And I did that for a number of years until fourth edition came out, and the open gaming wasn't so supported anymore. But fortunately, at that time, Paizo sprung up, and then my friend Wolfgang Bauer, who does Kobold Press, was working on doing books for Pathfinder. And so I did this Advanced Feats series, which were books of feats and then character builds using the feats and little designer commentary. I took kind of an unusual approach to it as my. So those were my first published printed publications. And then years later, I met Dave Scott from Evil Genius Games, and I was just recovering from acute myeloid leukemia, which was not a lot of fun. But I had beaten the thing and was feeling healthy and ready to tackle some kind of challenge in life. And I was looking for something to do. And Jeff Grubb referred him to me, and they were like, "Hey, you want to make a role playing game?" And I was like, "Hell yeah, I want to make a role playing game. Are you kidding me?" So like Dave didn't really like my first pitch. He's like, "I have this movie game," so I pitched him something very kind of movie themed, right? He's like, "No, no, no, it's just D&D, but for modern action movies." I'm like, "Oh yeah, okay." No, hold on, I could write that. I'll write any game you want. So we got together and talked about it, and that's kind of how I got to be lead game designer, writer for Everyday Heroes. I will also say my partner Chris Goober Ramsley is also equally responsible for this game. I'm nominally the lead, but it was really a partnership between the two of us to design the game and the cinematic adventures that followed.
Mm. So,
So that's my story.
so I'm very curious about the creation process.
Mhm.
So when something like this falls on your lap, where does your mind go first? Do you think first like, okay, let me work on the rules first, or is setting more important to you? How did the
Mm.
design process go exactly?
Well, we talked about with Dave, like I said, I wrote a pitch for him. He kind of explained what he wanted to do. I wrote my vision for it. We brought Goober in because Goober had written a set of chase rules, and action chases are really important in action films. And so Goober was brought in for that, and we just got together. And honestly, we just work very easily together. We just kind of sit down and we rock and roll, and then we trade manuscripts and we go over each other's stuff and try to synergize. So it's a great working relationship, and it's a lot of fun, to be honest. So for us, a big thing was, he wanted to do a 5e game because we want to get the maximum number of people playing. And I honestly like 5e. Sometimes I get flack from other game designers. They're like, "Oh, it's so it's fine. Like it's a very understandable game system. People know how to play it. The odds of your dice rolls are intuitive, so people understand what the risk versus reward can be for any given roll. And pretty good game system. I like it a lot. It works good for an action game where there's going to be a lot of fighting and driving and things exploding and stuff. So I started by taking the system reference document from Wizards of the Coast, reading it carefully, taking my knowledge of D&D, but I wanted to give it a good solid read. And then I chucked it off to the side and I started to rewrite the rules using my own language and my own style so that it would match the rest of the book. And so that if anything ever happened to the open gaming license, and this turned out to be a nice safe harbor for a little while there, well, that was kind of rocky. I could honestly say I did not copy it. I didn't use that text verbatim. I rewrote the rules in my own language, right? Using some of their conventions for how you say things, but in my own style and in my own words. That way, we'd be safe if anything ever happened, and if for some reason Dave didn't technically want to use the open gaming license, we'd be all right. I'm a big believer in it, so I've always tried to make everything I've worked on be under an open license of some kind because I really believe in sharing with other game designers and building on each other's work. And that's just kind of how I roll. So that was the core of it. Then I believe especially in fifth edition, but in most games, classes are really the beating heart of a project and of a game system. So I was like, we need to be working on classes first, and we need to be working on classes last, right? We will be working on them the entire time because everything connects to the class system. And so that was kind of the case. We laid out how many we're going to have and how they're going to be. We're using D20 Modern as an inspiration because that's the game that Dave really resonated with, back in the day, and he loved playing, and he wanted a modern version of that game. And so, while I didn't go read the book because, again, I don't want to lift anything that's not sort of shared with me, right? But I did sort of skim through it and get the vibe, and also see what are some of the major elements. So, our archetypes: the strong hero, tough hero, wise hero, agile hero, charming hero, and smart hero, were taken from the idea in their game D20 Modern that there are classes based on each attribute. And I actually think there's a lot of reasons why that is a really cool way to do things. And I tried to sort of build and add to that and really leverage it so that one reason it's great is really easy to make a character. You're like, I'm a strong hero, so I should have some strength. And then I can play around with everything else and still be a good character no matter what kind of choices I make, right? So long as I'm reasonably strong, it's all going to synergize and play pretty well. So anyway, so we build the classes, and then other elements were like, well, we don't have races, right? That's not a thing in the modern world. Sure, shouldn't be, let's say. So what we did is we made profession a key element in building a character. So what's your job? Most people have to make a living of some kind, right? So
Mm,
and we do have kind of like a job for people who don't have a job or you're independently wealthy and that kind of thing. But most characters are going to have a job or a day job they do. Might be tied. They might be a spy or something. It could tie into the action, or they could be a secretary or a janitor or something. But and then at night they're a crime fighter, or whatever they want to be. So that was a big element to design, and we spent a lot of time on that. And then there's a lot of filling out different sections. Everyday Heroes is written to be somebody's first RPG because I really believe in introducing new people into the hobby. It's a big thing for me to always be growing and sharing what I love with other people. So I wanted it to be capable of being somebody's first role playing game. So it does have all the kind of basic wisdom that I've learned over many years of being a gamer, and also all the wisdom that Goober has, which is quite extensive. And we also consulted my friend Jeff Grubb and other people who worked on D20 Modern to really just make it a book that works for everybody, whether it's your first game you've ever played or you've been playing, 5e for the last however long it's been around and been playing D&D since the 80s like me. Then it should work for you too, and you can kind of skip the parts you already know. So we tried to structure it all so that it's very easy to consume the parts of the book that you want. It's like 860, 70 pages. I forget. It's very big.
mm.
No, sorry, not 800. I'm sorry, 400. 400 and some odd pages. And so it's a lot of book. I don't expect people to sit down and go through every page, right? So we try to make it so that you can move through the book and just consume the parts that are going to be relevant to you,
Mm.
which was important to me.
So, if I were to guess, the reason why it's close to 400 pages because, like D&D has three books. They have the Monster
Yeah,
Manual, Dungeon Master's Guide, and Player's Handbook. But this core rule book is pretty much um, a combination of the best of all three books in one. Am I correct about that?
that's right. It should be everything you need to play Everyday Heroes. It has all kinds of articles and assistance as a game master, either for experienced game masters to kind of ease into running a modern game, which has a different feel and different dynamics than, say, a fantasy game or a science fiction game. Closer to science fiction, but a set of enemies to fight. You know, all the kind of cast of characters you get in a cops and robbers movie, or in a spy thriller, or in post-apocalypse kind of like near future game, all that kind of stuff. But then we also threw in the NPC section like some dinosaurs and some aliens and stuff from modern films to kind of say to people, this game is based in a modern setting and it's kind of like the real world is the default setting, or at least the real world as Hollywood sees it. But you can totally use it to go into all these different areas. And the intent from the beginning was we would have these movie licenses. And so it needed to be a flexible toolbox like game that doesn't sort of pigeonhole you into one genre or one feeling. You want to do realistic military action? Like, we have the elements you need to go in that direction. You want to do slapstick sci-fi? We got the elements to do that. So it's kind of a balancing act. And because it's such a kitchen sink, then we needed a big book to put everything in there. And I do tend to like the old days when you can go and buy one book and you had the game, right? You didn't need
Mm.
anything else, even if it's a very big book. I personally like that, and the other designers were into it, so we went and did that. Also, for modern games, we're gonna have a lot of street thugs, and
Mm.
like criminals and things. That they're not the kind of thing that would make a great monster manual all on its own. It'd be a little underwhelming. So we didn't think it made sense to do those books. We just wanted the toolkit. And then we would have our cinematic adventures, which are worlds like Rambo and Highlander, Pacific Rim, where, we take this basis and then go in different directions and add the kind of elements that make that world feel like that world. Um,
I'm very impressed that you were able to take the I guess the core elements of the 5e system and create a working modern setting. Was that difficult to do? I think when people think of D&D and taking the core rules and changing it to modern, they think it's like can that work because of all the um, different elements that make the game D&D. Did you have any difficulty whatsoever? Any translation issues?
it's not too difficult. I'll say that the number one difference, and it's kind of a subtle thing that people don't necessarily think about immediately. The big difference between playing a modern role playing game and a fantasy game is that fantasy games are structured in that kind of, I guess they call them murder hobos, but the adventuring party that goes out into the wilderness. They collect treasure and money, and that's their fame and fortune, right? Modern action movies are about cops fighting drug dealers, or secret agents diffusing bombs from terrorists, or crazy things that happen while you're going to the shopping market. And it usually involves crime of some kind. It doesn't always have to, but it often does, right? um it There's no treasure to collect. Like, you're doing your job most of the time, or you're trying to help your local community, or you're fighting for a cause you believe in. So there isn't that, like, oh, how many gold pieces did I get? Did I find a shotgun? You could go on Amazon and order a shotgun. Like, you're not gonna find treasure. That's not why you're adventuring, is to get stuff from people you beat up, right? You beat people up because you have a dispute, a conflict of some kind with them. So that's fundamentally different. And so, like, in Everyday Heroes, we don't track how much money you own. You just have sort of a wealth. It's called a wealth level. It's like your lifestyle. So wealth level 6 is you're like Elon Musk or something, right? You're super rich. You're Bill Gates. You can buy a company if you like it. Um, Players usually can't achieve that. We do have a class called the billionaire, which that's their power, is they have tons of money. They could just do stuff like that, right? But usually you go up to 5, which would just be a very wealthy person. You'd have the best restaurants, you have $1 million, you got sports cars, that kind of lifestyle, rock star lifestyle. Or down to 1, which is you're barely scraping by, maybe you have a job, doesn't pay very much hand to mouth, and you're just trying to make do on the streets, right? And just you can buy anything that that lifestyle would normally afford you, and you can use common sense. We do list, what price level different things are at. So if it's at or below your wealth level, its price level, then you can buy it. In fact, you probably assume you already own it. You just need to go home to get it. If you didn't write it on your character sheet and you're out in the desert or something, well, then you don't have access. But if you're in the city, you could just pop back to the house and get your table saw or whatever it is that you want, right? So
Hmm.
that's a very different feel and aspect. Now, to make the system, really the 5e system is very generic. It's very simple. You roll a d20. Did you roll higher or not than the number you were trying to roll? And you've got some hit points that can represent almost anything. We try to encourage people that, like, if you got hit by a machine gun and it didn't drop you, well, it probably didn't like hit you in the chest or something, right? Like, you lost some hit points. Those bullets might not have actually, quote unquote, hit you, but they came close. They're bringing you closer to being defeated, right? So that's a very flexible mechanic that you can do a lot of different narrative things with. So it's actually a really flexible system, but we don't want to feel like D&D. So a big part of that is equipment, weapons, making firearms feel like they do in a film, like they're a little more damaging. So our game is a little shorter combat because it's a little higher damage and a little lower defense, which we like to because it just makes combat um, a little less sloggy than it is in D&D, especially at higher levels, right?
Hmm.
So although technically the game is meant to be balanced, so you could bring a D&D monster, play it against everyday heroes characters, and it would be about the right challenge rating. The fight might be a little faster, but it's generally going to work out just fine. So if you want to do that, if you want to throw everyday hero characters into a D&D adventure, you could also do that. There's a few rules you have to kind of sort out how you're going to cross over. We do armor totally differently than in D&D, but our defense score, which is exactly the same as armor class mechanically, can be interchanged and can work the same way. It's just how you get that number is different. In our game, it's derived from your character's primary ability score. So smart heroes are clever and they know to stay out of harm's way. So they get some defense from their intelligence, not from wearing a bunch of metal on themselves. Now, you can strap on a bulletproof vest, but in our game, what that does is if you're about to go down, if you take a wound that would drop you to 0 hit points, you're going to get an armor saving throw, and the armor might stop the bullet and save your life, right? So it's just at that last clutch moment that armor comes into play in everyday heroes. Because when we were making the game, Dave's like, look, John McClane doesn't wear any armor. Rambo doesn't wear any armor. Like, I don't want people wearing armor in my game. And I'm like, oh, you can't tell people what to do in a role playing game, but you can make the system so that you don't feel like an idiot if you're not wearing armor. In D&D, you want as much armor as your class allows you to wear, right? In everyday heroes, you really only need it if you're going into a really dangerous situation where you think you might be killed by gunfire, because a bulletproof vest doesn't really help you against a sword or something. There's too many places you can get hit, so it doesn't really help you. But if you're going into a firefight and it could be deadly, yeah, maybe put on a bulletproof vest. It might save your life. And that, doing the mechanics differently, gives you a different feel at the table. We also have, like, for machine guns, we have something called suppressive fire. It's a little like basically it's an area effect that makes people want to get out of there because they will take damage if they stay in the area that you're spraying bullets. Again, even if you weren't getting hit by a bullet, you're under threat of this gunfire, and so it's stressful, and so it's potentially going to decrease your hit points and put you in a bad situation. And so what it makes you want to do is duck behind a building or jump out of the way or get out of the area where these bullets are coming down, and which is, according to my research, basically what machine guns were invented for in the military. They're not for taking precise shots at people. They're for making the enemy hide behind the bushes so that you can move your troops into position and you can get into a position to outflank the enemy. So it's really a defensive capability of a weapon. And so I tried to design the rules so it would feel that way. And it confuses people at first because they're like, I don't understand what's it for? But we try in the rules to explain it. But these are new elements that give it a different feel than D&D. Um,
Hmm.
Another rule we have that's different is called dive for cover. So if a grenade lands near your feet, or a bomb is about to go off, or somebody is doing something of that kind, or spraying you with bullets, you can dive for cover. So you use your reaction and you either get behind a wall, or you jump out the window, or you just hightail it. You land prone because you were leaping for your life, and you just get out of, you don't take the damage. Of course, if you were without your reaction, you've already dived for cover this turn, you might be in a very bad situation. So, and that just gives it that action movie feel where you can jump out of the way of the exploding. Not always very realistic, but it feels right, So, and it's
Hmm.
a pretty fun rule, and it just feels cinematic. So we're always going for a cinematic feeling, right? An exciting, quick action feel.
Hmm. And I love how this core rulebook has such great adaptability, so that the other source books that you mentioned, like the Highlander, Escape from New York, Pacific Rim, all of those source books, which we'll get a separate video in the future because they're worth looking into and discussing. But
Cool.
for Everyday Heroes core rulebook itself, what can someone expect? Um, you can be like, what's the I could say the uh not the limits, I don't want to say that, but more of the,
Mhm.
like, what can you be in the modern setting that's presented in the core rule book?
Yeah, it's a pretty wide range. We had these 6 archetypes, and then we were going to do 3 classes for each archetype. But the boss always gets what he wants, and there were a couple archetypes where he's like, "I just want this class in there." It's like, "I want a hacker." You don't have a hacker, and I'm like, "Okay, we'll put a hacker in." And he's like, "I want a fencer." I'm like, "Well, fencer's a little narrow, so let's go duelist." So you have to use your imagination a little bit sometimes. So like we have the scoundrel class, and the scoundrel is kind of like a rogue in D&D. Mechanically, they have a what's called a vital strike mechanic. So you do bonus damage. If you have advantage on someone, you get them in a tough spot. And they have a pretty good selection of skills, and they're quite fast and very mobile, right? Um, that class, you call him a scoundrel. Does that mean your character has to be a bad person? No, you could be just like an expert spy or something, right? You've got these skills, so you do have to think. We have to give the classes an evocative name and feeling, right? But we tried to make them so mechanically they are actually pretty versatile for capturing different kinds of people from movies, different kinds of action heroes and characters. From the guy in the center of the rulebook there, he's a brawler, so they smash tables. Anything can be a weapon in their hands. They're the ultimate bar room brawler, and they can throw people through tables, etc. So they're that kind of a character. We've also got genius characters with smart heroes like the mastermind, and this is the character who is always one step ahead of everybody else. And they do that, they portray that through a mechanic called plans, which are a little bit like spells and were inspired by spells in D&D, but they are complex machinations that character is so smart that they planned ahead for whatever situation they happen to be in now. And the player can sort of retroactively say, yeah, well, I spent the last week surveilling the bad guy's hideout, and I had I hired some security experts to get detailed plans. And so I know the layout of this building. I know where the exits are, and I know where the guards are, right? You can't do that in a traditional 5e game unless you had some magic spell that you cast that lets you clairvoyance and stuff. So we simulate the genius of smart heroes by letting them have some plot control and retroactive continuity that's sort of fiated by the rules. So they're great characters to play if you like that kind of player driven storytelling in a game like you might get in a Powered by the Apocalypse game or something. It lets you be that storyteller player. On the other hand, we have simple characters like the Commando. They're really tough. They get an extra action once per rest. They get to heal up. They can do a second wind as a bonus action. In our game, everybody can kind of do a second wind and steal themselves, by spending some hit dice. But they can do it quickly. They get to throw grenades as a free action. They get a lot of nice, just generic benefits that are really easy to play and use. And so there's this very simple but very capable character for people who don't want to get too fancy, right? I got my gun, I got my grenade, I'm ready to fight. So I really wanted there to be as broad a range, both mechanically and thematically, as we could possibly get in there. And I tried to write the introductions for each class, or it says at first kind of the vibe, the theme, the idea we had behind it. And then the second paragraph is a little bit of mechanical description to give you an idea. What's it like to play this class? How does it feel when you play it? So is this what you're looking for? But our players are incredibly creative in mix and matching. There's a multi-class system that works through taking feats. So every class has a series of feats associated with it. And let's say you're a brawler. You can also take a feat to become a smart hero and start to use genius plans. So you can be the guy that throws people through the window and then pulls out their jetpack and their backpack that was hidden back there and flies to the next building to beat up some more bad guys, right? So you can mix and match all of these things to make almost any combination. When we were writing the game, Dave would like throw me his favorite movie characters. He's like, "Can I make this character? Can I make this character?" At one time, he sent me a batch of like 5 femme fatales, and I didn't know all these characters, and I went and looked them up. Every last one of them was like raised by Russian assassins, and I'm like, I guess I don't have anything to represent that you were a childhood trained assassin in the game. So I will make a background called Raised by Assassins so that you can have that. So that was kind of the challenge. You would throw stuff at me and we'd make things. The only limitations in the core rulebook are we don't have like future tech stuff. So there's no cybernetics or any of that. There's no magic. There's no spell casting or anything. We have like a mystic martial artist, but in theory, everything they're doing is a real physical thing. They may have some spiritual outlook on life, but the way they operate is, not science fiction. However, in our cinematic adventures and in the book called The Vault, which collects all the supplemental rules we did for the cinematic adventures, it has all that stuff. So we got magic stuff. We've got not a lot of magic, but some supernatural things for sure. We got mutants. We got cyborgs, fortune tellers, immortal warriors, giant robots, and giant monsters. All that kind of stuff is in there. So if you combine those two books, the only thing you can't really do is like traditional fantasy because that market's covered, right? There's plenty of D20 fantasy games out there, no shortage. So we don't do that part, but almost everything else. We are working on a modern fantasy book and setting called Everyday Arcana in the spirit of urban arcana. It's a little ways out still. It's kind of a project. It's got a long tail on it. Been working on it, but that'll give you an actual spell casting system and some other magic items and artifacts and some of that kind of bringing D&D into a modern world type feel. And so that's something still in the books.
Oh,
Don't have
that's
that
really
yet, but
exciting.
yeah, we got some playtest material, so people, if they come and they want to playtest, then they get to see future things. We've got a book called The Armory, which is like more than 700 pieces of modern, future, and historical equipment. If you're into that kind of thing, it's was meticulously researched and took me forever to write. It was a very challenging book, and a number of other authors as well worked on it. So hopefully in the future that'll be available too for people who want to get into that detail. Core rulebook doesn't detail the difference between an M16 and a Kalashnikov rifle, or a Browning or anything else. It has some kind of generic modern weapons, shotgun, a light machine gun, assault rifle, that kind of stuff. But that the armory has all the gritty details for people who want to get into that. So we try to make it, like I said, it's a toolbox game. So take the parts you like. It's not meant just play everything. That it's too many things, right? Like honestly, like it would be the kitchen sink multiverse. If you liked that, okay, great. But it'd be a bit overwhelming. So it's trying to design like take the pieces you like to play at your table the way you want it to feel.
The art style for this is really cool. It reminds me definitely of like the 80s, 90s movie posters design style. Even looks like there's some inspiration from video game covers
Mm-hmm.
from back then. Well, how involved were you with the design for this book?
Not a lot. So I wrote it, of course, and then worked with the editor on the editing process and the organization of it. I write art orders a lot. Now, I didn't so much with the core rule book, but as time went on, I would write more and more of the art orders for the projects that I worked on. And it's a process I really enjoy. I love seeing writing an art order, and then you get the art back, and especially when it's even better than you imagined, and you're just like, oh, that's so perfect. It's exactly the idea that was in my head, except done by a talented artist, right? So that's great. This book, our first book, we didn't have an art director, so it's a little unfocused. They're just kind of all over the place. Each artist kind of bringing their own talent and creativity to what they're doing. And so you'll find a few different styles in Everyday Heroes. We were going for a similar vibe of D20 Modern, which I would describe as a little bit of a comic book style of illustration of characters, but then sometimes a more realistic style when we're portraying a scene that's focused on the cars, the vehicles, and things like that. So characters a little bit animated, and material objects a little bit more realistic is what you'll find through the book. Um, so yeah, for the first one, it's a little eclectic, and partly because we're just going for it. And I enjoy all the art. It's pretty cool. So there are some that are my favorites, right? So ones that I got to order, especially you'll find in the backgrounds, professions, and classes, a lot of those are things that I got to have a lot of influence on, and to help the artist tune into the vision I have. And little personal things, like I used my wife as a model for one of the characters, and so I love that picture. And then just some of them came out great. There's like a Greek Orthodox guy on a motorcycle that I really love that illustration. The one for the Raised by Assassins is very cute. It's like a ninja with a baby nursing a baby with a bottle, and then the baby's got a little shuriken in their hands. So those are kind of, I like to have a little sense of subtle humor in both my writing and when I'm doing art orders, to kind of uh, I believe in art creating a story, right? So if you look at a character, even if it's just a single character, and you look at the things that they have and the way they're dressed and the way they stand, it should all tell you something about who they are and suggest almost a story of their life. So you wonder, how does the baby get the shuriken? Why is the ninja raising the baby? A picture that raises these questions is going to be interesting and stick with you, right? So I do have a lot of sort of thoughts about how I try to structure an art order and what I want to put in it, so that you get memorable stuff. Because I remember I grew up kind of with like the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons Dungeon Master's Guide was one of my first D&D books. That and the Red Box Basic Set, and I would just pour over some of those pictures, and I can still see pictures of like Morgan Ironwolf, I think was one of the characters' name, and Emerlock the Chaotic, and some of these things, because I looked at them and I imagined who that person was and the adventures that they had. And so whenever I can through art, I want that to be there. Don't It doesn't always hit the mark, but a lot of the time. And so
Hmm.
that's kind of my thing with art.
If I may ask, what's been your favorite character that you made from this game?
It's kind of always the most recent one, maybe. So I was playing. There was a convention that our fans ran called Nacho Con Line, which is based on our Ego organized play program. It's set in a kind of tongue-in-cheek, slightly silly modern spies kind of thing, where anything could happen. You know, people could animate television sets, or there's all kinds of weird science and stuff like that. So it's a silly world, and the characters are agents that operate out of the Nacho House, which is a Mexican German fusion restaurant, et cetera, et cetera. So I was making a character to play in one of those games. So I made a guy named Half Price Eddie, and he's kind of like your, hey, Half Price Eddie. Hey, would you like some leopard skin seat colors for your car? I mean, it's pretty cool now, but it could be so much better. So he's this goofy salesman. And I used the gutter rat class from Escape from New York, who was based on one of the characters in that film, who's just sort of a bottom dweller of a person, does everything the kind of cheesy way. But that doesn't mean I have to be an evil person. Half Price Eddie's a nice guy. He fights for good. It's just the only way he knows how to do things is to be kind of deceptive and tricky and distracting. So one of his main powers is the ability to distract enemies with his banter and his ridiculous behavior. And so it came in handy many times where there's a room, the other characters want to get on the computer and do something. So Half Price Eddie is like, hey, can I show you a magic trick? It involves a condom, a rabbit, and a nail gun. Can't you wait to see what happens, right? You know, and then be like, what the hell is happening here? Gotta see what kind of magic trick that is, you know. So yeah, that was a fun character. I had a blast playing Half Price Eddie. So
Oh, this sounds fantastic. So currently, right now, you could order print copies online or at your local gaming store. You can also get this at Drive Thru RPG. Am
mhm.
I missing any place else?
You know, our own website, we do sell stuff on there, evilgeniusgames.com. So we got a storefront. Also, we have a new digital service called Sidekick. And so if you'd like to read books online and have a searchable interface and hot links between different books and stuff like that, Evil Genius Games has been putting together that. You'll also find it on our website. So, but we always encourage people, especially if you want the hard book, to go to your local retailer that you like, support them. Say, hey, do you have Everyday Heroes? I heard that's cool. And if they don't have it, they'll probably get a copy for you. So, we like to support the local game stores and the local gaming community. So that's always good. But anyway, you want to get it, we're happy that, or I'm happy at least that you're trying it out and having fun with it. We also have a free quick start version you can get on Drive Through RPG, and it's got all the rules for the game. It doesn't have all the classes and backgrounds, it doesn't have all the fun bells and whistles, but it's certainly enough to play. And we also have some free adventures out there that you can grab. There's To Dethrone a Dictator, kind of a military fantasy, and I think Welcome to the Jungle, and a couple others that are floating around. And if you subscribe to the online service I was talking about, you can get access to all kinds of convention adventures and other stuff that we have, so that you can just sit down and get playing. Because that's the main thing. It's fun book to read. Happy if people buy it just to have a cool book to go over and get ideas from. But I'm even more happy if you get to play, because that's when you get to have a lot of fun. So
Hmm. Well, I will put all the links in the description below. Before we wrap up, one last question.
mhm.
Being that we're talking about everyday heroes, a modern setting full of action and adventure, what is the last good action movie or action TV series you saw that you really enjoyed?
Oh, okay. Well, I'm just going to say the first thing that comes to mind, which is the program Reacher,
Mm,
which is based on a series of novels. There were some Tom Cruise movies, but right now Amazon has the Reacher TV series, and I'm going to forget the actor's name. He's the same guy that played Hawk on
Titans.
DC Universe. Yeah, on Titans. That's right, Titans. Yeah. I love that actor. He's great. He does such a good job with that character. I'm kind of a big guy like him a little bit. So, like, I really identify with him. And, you know, I'm not quite as handsome or quite as muscly, uh, but he's an action hero. He's a big guy, likes to think of himself as smart and kind of wise. And that's what I aspire to. So that's a character that really resonates with me. And so I love that show. It's just great fun and so well portrayed. So that's one of my favorite modern action things of the last few years. So I'll go with that for now.
Yeah, and Reacher, that's definitely something you can like homebrew in Everyday Heroes as well. It's very easy to do.
Totally, yeah. Yeah, you could absolutely build that character and his friends and, you know, his teammate, and get into all kinds of adventures. I do wanna say, like, the modern world is a really fun place for stories, and a really fun place for mayhem and action and crazy stuff to happen. And it's kind of liberating when you jump in and you start doing it, and you realize, you know, the world we're in is filled with interesting stories that we understand and can intuitively role play and get going with. And it's great. I loved using Google Maps for my games, because, you know, we're going, oh, we're in San Francisco, we're going to go down to this street, and there's a heist at this bank, and they're like, oh, how are we going to get in the bank? You can just zoom in on Google Maps, you know, all the way down until you see the exact building, the layout, the surrounding buildings, and then the players can, like, oh, I'm going to be here. Can we get on the rooftop of this building? And it makes our world a playground almost for fantasy stories. So I think it's a real delight.
What I also like about this is that I once in a while I'll get a bunch of players, especially players that have played Dungeons and Dragons Fifth Edition, and they want to do a modern setting of some sort. They'll watch maybe the latest Mission Impossible movie, and they'll say, "Hey, can we do something like that?" Like, yeah, I'd love to run that. And I know a few times I tried different systems, and if they're into D&D 5e, sometimes it's a little tricky for them to adjust to a new system. But with this is
Yep.
perfect. I could just bring that to the table, and they're familiar with how combat works, how the role characters, and so forth, and makes definitely things easier for me at least as a game master. Um,
Yep, and I try to make the game easy to approach. Like, so we have some very simple characters to play, and yeah, ultimately, if you sit down at one of my tables and you've never played a role playing game before, I'm like, great. So this is a 20-sided dice, right? When I tell you to roll this, if you roll high, higher than the number I tell you, it's good. If you roll lower, it's kind of bad, and you can just play, right?
mm,
And you really don't need more than that. What I do is build all kinds of inspiration for people, right? And to get their
mm,
juices flowing and to give them ideas and to make a little. And if you get really into the rules, you can get into that part where, oh, it's fun to make characters that can defeat challenging enemies and stuff, right? But I also want it to be simple and elemental so people can just get in, start playing, and then the role playing naturally kind of comes out of them, right?
mm.
And I just love to see that. Some of the best moments are demoing a game for people who've never played role playing because they're not into this or that or the other thing, but they sit down and okay, oh, you're in a bank and there's a bank heist, right? And they're like, oh man, what am I going to do? And I'm like, yeah, your character is a karate master and you have a strong belief that people should be protected, right? And then it just starts to roll, right? And off you
Mm.
go. So I love that part of it.
So, viewers, thank you for watching this video. Everything that we talked about, I'll put a link in the description below, as I mentioned before. Um, Thank you so much, Siegfried, for taking the time to talk to us about Everyday Heroes, the core rulebook from Evil Genius Games. And everyone, stay safe out there. We'll see you next time.